Ever since I can remember, I've been told do not do drugs, but we know that drugs have been used for various reasons since probably the beginning of time. Welcome back to another episode of the Mental Health Break. Jonathan DePotter joins me today to talk about how psychedelic drugs can actually be used to elevate consciousness and heal repressed trauma. Hi, I'm Dr. Nafisa Sikandri, a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in anxiety-based disorders. I created the Mental Health Break podcast to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to help you prioritize your mental health. Mental illness can cost you time and money. Ignoring your symptoms will only make the problems worse. Taking time out of your busy day to dedicate to improving your mental health can lead to long-term health and wellness. In this podcast, each week you'll learn tips, tricks, and proven strategies to help you regain control of your life, all while prioritizing your mental health. If you want to improve your life, regain control of your mental health, and feel empowered, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Today's episode is brought to you by the Transforming Anxiety course, an online, self-paced anxiety course to help you manage and control your anxiety from the comfort, privacy, and convenience of your own home. Learn how to transform your anxiety in just 6 short weeks. Course registration is now open. To learn more, visit transforminganxiety.com/course. Today, I'm joined by Jonathan DePotter, who joins me to talk about how we can use psychedelics to elevate our consciousness. Let me introduce him briefly before I bring him on. Jonathan DePotter is the founder and CEO of Behold Retreats and advocates for self-improvement and elevating consciousness as the most meaningful way to better the world. Jonathan's priority is to raise education and awareness about plant medicines like ayahuasca and psilocybin, and guides others to maximize the potential benefits, ultimately leading him to launch Behold Retreats. Behold Retreats promises 7 years of growth in 7 weeks for leaders, executives, and entrepreneurs, providing safety, expertise, and curation to the discerning with memorable, private, and group retreats available in idyllic locations. Prior to founding Behold Retreats, Jonathan worked as a strategy consultant at Accenture and Capco, supporting Fortune 500 companies with their digital strategy and technology transformations. Well,
Beautiful.
hi, Jonathan. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Doctor. It's a real pleasure and excited to explore this subject together.
I am so excited to talk to you. I just shared a little bit about your background and experience with health and wellness. And can you talk a little bit, or just with your retreats, can you talk a little bit about your background and then who you serve?
Yeah, sure. So I guess to start all the way back, I grew up in Hawaii in a very substance-rich environment, and I saw a lot of dark energy and negativity from that. And so I never took any interest in that. I had a lot of friends, unfortunately, who found, psychedelics, marijuana, other quote unquote drugs from a very young age. And so I just saw that there was kind of dark energy around that. And so I, despite having hippie parents, went completely in the other direction, entered the corporate world, have spent most of my career in management and strategy consulting with Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, supporting them on digital strategy, digital transformation, corporate work, And after about 5 years of that, most recently with Accenture in Hong Kong, I was an atheist at the time, and I just reached a point where I was chasing the next client, chasing the next deal, chasing the next promotion, and I just had to stop and pause and ask myself, there's got to be more to life. And so I decided to take a year off, and as part of that, found my way to Peru and attended a retreat with a couple of friends of mine, which has subsequently set me on a fundamentally different path and led me to establish Behold Retreats to help other people find more transformational plant medicine experiences versus the norm that are out there and available. And, it's a pretty unregulated space at the moment. So it's a bit of a Wild West, if you will.
So interesting. I mean, when you reached out, I didn't really know much about the whole psychedelic world, but since then, it's so weird how this works. I've been getting a lot of information sent to me, even in the psychological field. A lot of psychologists are showing interest. And then just today, right before this interview, there was an article that popped up that talked about ecstasy or Molly being MDMA, getting closer to being medically approved for clinical use. So let me share what it said in this article really quickly. It says, in the new study, which is expected to be published later this month in Nature Medicine, those who received MDMA during therapy experienced a significantly greater reduction in the severity of their symptoms compared to those who received therapy in an inactive placebo. 2 months after treatment, 67% of participants in the MDMA group no longer qualified for the diagnosis of PTSD, compared to 32% in the placebo group. So psychedelics have been used in shamanic practice for thousands of years, right? And there were many psychologists that were experimenting with psychedelics in the 60s and 70s, Ram Dass being one of them.
Uh-huh.
So there are a lot of people like me that probably really don't know much about psychedelics and how they're used. And we've been told for so long, do not use drugs, it's bad for your brain, right? So can you tell us a little bit about what are some common psychedelics used today and what benefit do people get when they use them?
Yeah, and to kind of contextualize this, the first thing I would share is that I don't see these plants or these substances as necessarily positive in of themselves. It's the context and the way in which they're used that makes the fundamental difference. So, commonly speaking, when we speak about psychedelics, we're talking about LSD, we're talking about psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. We're talking about peyote and San Pedro, which are two cacti that are commonly used within Native American indigenous traditions. And then we also, more commonly, there's a growing interest in plant medicines like ayahuasca, which has DMT, or what is often referred to as the spirit molecule, as the underlying active ingredient. And then there's even more powerful experiences still, such as BUFA, which is 5-MeO DMT. And so that kind of encompasses what I would generally describe as the classic psychedelics. There's a few others, around the edges, iboga, some others that I may have missed there that people might hit me up about. But more recently now, there's also a greater interest in ketamine and MDMA, which are obviously synthetic molecules that have been around for quite a while now. And those are kind of being lumped in with psychedelics. There's quite a few businesses that have, shall we say, great interest in claiming the psychedelic space. And so they've kind of lumped in these psychoactive compounds that are not, in fact, psychedelic, in order to be able to use the word psychedelic ahead of legalization of what you might describe as the more classic psychedelics, if that makes sense.
Oh, see, that's interesting. I wouldn't have known that. So I guess it's the whole patenting thing, right? They're taking natural substances and they're marketing it and making a lot of money out of it.
Yeah, it's if we wind back, I think we might have hoped that this ecosystem, this industry, if you will, might have taken a different shape, in that these were hopefully a group of people who have had these experiences like universal love and these sorts of things, and that might have led the industry into a more dynamic and open and non-controlling patent route. But of course, it's the tragedy of the commons. If there's billions to be made by virtue of investing hundreds of millions and getting those patents and being able to control and command, the future under a medicalized model, then guess what? Someone's going to do it. It's just a matter of who.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that we're dealing with that with just regular plant-based medicines or herbs and supplements. A lot of them are considered harmful or not useful by the medical industry, but then they go and patent it and create some synthetic version of it and then market it. So, yeah, I totally get that. So you're based in Thailand right now. Is that where your retreats happen, or do you have them around the world?
So at the moment, we have retreats in Costa Rica, Mexico, Peru, and then Netherlands, and shortly we'll have them in Portugal and Jamaica as well. I am in conversations with a few of the governments here in the Asian region to see who might like to be first in terms of establishing a first legal location. At the moment, there's nothing that's permissible in the region. It was actually the U.S. As part of their campaign on the war on drugs or war on consciousness, depending upon who you're talking to. They actually required that any countries that wish to maintain trade agreements with the U.S. also sign something through the UN around 1971, which also prohibited these powerful substances, medicines, to be used basically across the globe. And so, at the time, most of the countries didn't understand, didn't know what these medicines represented. And so here, they heard from the US saying, hey, there's these powerful drugs that are damaging to people. You should sign this thing to make sure that we keep them illegal. And they said, okay, sounds reasonable to me. So there's a lot more education actually required, because the region here in Asia doesn't have the same history. There certainly is evidence of 2nd and 9th century use in the Buddhist traditions, and I think virtually every ancient civilization, we've got some pretty strong evidence of plant medicine use under a variety of titles, but there's a lot more education required here in Asia. The benefit being that we can use plant medicine as opposed to using the word psychedelics, which has a certain sort of crazed association with it, and it fits the medicine traditions, right? Whether we're talking about India or China or even Japan, there's already they've maintained plant medicine traditions throughout the ages, even as the Western medical model has tried to come over the top.
Wow. There's so much politics around this as well. And I know that I don't want to get into all of that and make it messy, but I just want to talk about how there are a lot of, I actually personally, psychologists here in Arizona that uses psychedelics or plant-based psychedelics, I guess, for mental health reasons. She's definitely trained and knows how to do that. I would be cautious about using it with anybody because I'm not trained in it and I don't understand. So you actually lead these retreats, right? And the purpose is to elevate consciousness. Can you talk a little bit about what does that look like and what benefits people can get from elevating their consciousness?
Yeah, sure. So first thing that I would say is that I don't lead the retreats. The people that we know, love, and trust to lead this powerful work have been doing this work for decades. And I only just had my first experience for about 5 years ago. So I've learned a lot, certainly, over those past 5 years, but I personally don't feel qualified to facilitate these powerful experiences. So just wanted to kind of caveat that. It's a great question. So when we, at the moment, the mental health paradigm that we've stuck ourselves into is relatively unhelpful. We've kind of set this subjective bar, and we say that anyone that's below this bar has a mental health problem and needs treatment. Anyone who's above this bar is doing just fine and doesn't need to worry about anything. And so fundamentally, that's not it. Each of us is at a level of consciousness, and each of us can improve our level of consciousness. And so when we speak about consciousness, what we mean generally is how well we know ourselves. So how much, how deep we've gone within our own being. And so, in the modern Western world, there's so many distractions that are happening here on the outside, right? We've got all these commitments from personal and professional life. We've got, career ambitions to chase, traffic, shopping, the list goes on and on. The to-do list is ever present. And so when we speak about consciousness, we're trying to remove the layers of what we are not so that we can see what we truly are as human beings. And so plant medicine is a very powerful tool. There's a gentleman who I respect that has this great quote, which he describes psychedelics as non-specific amplifiers of the subconscious, and I think that's a great description because they really do amplify what's happening there in the subconscious, and so that gives us kind of unparalleled access and the opportunity to confront, process, and put behind us things that may have happened early in life. Pretty much I would say 80% plus of people who do this work tend to find that childhood trauma comes up, and that could be either known childhood trauma or unknown childhood trauma. In my case, it was unknown childhood trauma. And when these experiences from early life are developed, it's very easy to see how those traumatic or challenging experiences have led to manifestations in character in the current day. And so, the example I sometimes give, just to kind of provide people some context for the impact of what can be considered a minor infraction, is, imagine that you're 5 years old, you're carrying some groceries in for your mom, and at the end of a long day, she's, just had a bad one at work and she's tired and grumpy, and you drop some groceries. And in that moment, mom says, "You never get anything right. just get out of the way. And at 5 years old, we don't have the ability to distinguish between that which should take hold in our subconscious, and that's just mom at the end of a bad day. And so that can and does take hold in the subconscious. And then, perhaps the next day the child's at school playing ball with some friends and gets the ball. And in that moment, you never get anything right. Just get out of the way. The tape replays. And then, fundamentally, that can set something as minor as that can set a child on a fundamentally different developmental path.
Definitely. I mean, that's the work of a lot of people that do work with trauma. They understand that, and it takes a lot to uncover that. But these plant-based medicines, they tend to work faster than just the typical route that mental health professionals go without the psychedelics.
Yeah. So one of the ways that I often describe this is that I think in the MRI scans that we do on your typical modern Western brain, you can see a high degree of compartmentalization. And I think part of this is as a result of the overwhelm that we face in the modern Western world. There's just so much to do, so many decisions to make. It's just too much, right? We just can't possibly deal with it all. And so what tends to happen is that as a sort of energy efficient mechanism to respond to the overwhelming complexity of everyday life, we begin to take neurological shortcuts in order to be able to cope. And it sounds like a natural, positive, adaptive response. But in practice, what tends to happen is that these neurological shortcuts become the highways in the ways that we think. And so I think we all know people in our lives that if you were to present them with some new piece of information, you already know how they're going to respond. And that's evidence of compartmentalization and deterministic thinking. So overly patterned thinking, short circuits in the wiring of the software of the brain. And so what these plant medicines do is they promote neurogenesis, which is to create new neurons, which used to be thought impossible, and they create new neuronal connections. So they give us back neuroplasticity across our brains. And so what the MRI scan shows is that a person's brain under, say, the influence of psilocybin actually looks closer to a Buddhist monk with 30 years meditation practice than it does to a Western brain, if that makes sense. So it's everything's far more interconnected. You're able to reaccess, elements of your memory that have been suppressed or repressed away because of this neurogenesis. And so as a result of that, everything's coming up. And so it's hard work, but the benefits to that in terms of improvements to the quality of everyday life and self-understanding, and ultimately elevating consciousness from lower levels like shame, guilt, fear, pride, envy, scarcity, up until the kind of neutrality around courage, willingness, acceptance, that sort of thing, peak rationality, and then up into the mystical states, which is really just a paradigm shift out of the mind and into the heart, and into states of peace, love, and joy. And that's, when we do this work and we're doing it well, and when we're working with executive clients, that's fundamentally the shift that we're looking for. We're looking for them to make the shift out of the mind, which is limited in its thinking. It's linear. It's, what I say to executives, it's like the difference between doing weeks of options analysis and discounted cash flows and ... versus just knowing the answer and being able to spit out four intuitive sentences that allow you to say, this is the right answer because it's the right thing for our customers, and here's why, and now let's move forward. So it really is quite profound in its ability to help people to find their own path, and also to be productive and successful, and keep a calm and peace of mind through the storm, as it were.
Well, like they say, the final frontier will be exploring our mind and figuring that out, right? There's so much that we don't know about how our brain works, and the difference between the brain and the mind, and how they're not really the same thing. You said that you were an atheist before. Did this experience change your spirituality and your connection?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, it was, I come from pretty hippie alternative parents. So, they were open to plant medicine. They'd had experiences in the 70s and, trying to encourage me to read a spiritual book or two. And I was just having none of it. I don't want to hear, I love you guys, but this is not for me, firmly down that route. So it's been a very humbling return. And yes, absolutely. My first ayahuasca experience, the first night was, I would say, the most challenging night of my life, easily so. But it definitely if not opened that door, blew the whole building down. And I was like, wow, okay, there's something here that I've been separating myself from. And so to have that door swung open in such a powerful way is something that people need to decide for themselves whether it's appropriate. This, despite this being the line of business that I'm in, I'm not necessarily, when clients come to us and say, oh yeah, 2 of my friends have done this and I want to do this, it's like, that's not the energy we want here. It's very important that people look into this, read, listen, watch, and then ultimately to tap into their own intuition, their own sense of knowing, and to develop their own sense of motivation as to why they might like to do this. And so for me personally, I honestly didn't know why I wanted to do it, but I knew that something was missing and I didn't know what it was. And so I had actually a friend 10 years prior that I had witnessed a very powerful transformation. She had a very traumatic childhood and she came back a month later, like pretty different. And for the better, she was organizing picnics and rock climbing and surfing. And I was like, wow, what happened to Sophie? And so that had kind of registered in the back of my mind. And so when a friend recommended, hey, why don't a couple of us come join you in Peru and let's go do this? And I was kind of like, yeah, okay, I think now I might be ready.
So for those that don't know what to expect, because this is something that people should not do on their own, right? I mean, this is why when the psychologist helps people, she's really there with them to help them go through that journey. Can you just share with us your own experience of what that hell looked like and what people can expect from the start, middle, and then end of it, just to get an idea of what is involved and what is entailed?
Yeah, I'll frame that by saying, it's such a sensitive time for this topic because we've got a Western medical approach that is kind of chugging its way forward. And then we have basically, but still illegal, right? So we've got this massive gap between the science, which is proven, and the policy, which is not there yet. And so what's happening is that tens of thousands of people are traveling towards these locations that I mentioned before in order to do this work in unregulated environments. And so there's no standards for safety. There's no standards for quality of care for how this work is being done. And so a man, woman, with a self-described shaman can find some medicine and begin to administer it to people. So there's a very broad variety of quality of work that's happening out there. And so I share that as much as anything for any of your listeners to do their due diligence. If you go to the retreat aggregator websites, what you'll find is that universally these experiences are being rated as 5 stars, and that's not an accurate reflection. It just goes to show that, number one, people are having profound experiences and positive experiences, but number two, that people don't understand the variability and the quality of work. And this reflects my own experience. For 3.5 years, I was going to all these different retreat centers, and I thought I knew what good looked like by virtue of going to these best rated retreat centers, but fundamentally that wasn't it. And so I will categorize the people working in this space to simplify into 3 categories. The first is people who are just applying medicine and seeing what happens. The second are people who can do the mental or somatic work, right? So they're holding space and they're doing therapeutic work with their clients. The third are the people who can do the energetic work, the spiritual work. And so those are people who are super sensitive to energy and can begin to transmute clients or transmute a client's energy and to bring them into very different spaces than is otherwise possible with the first 2 categories, if that makes sense. So in terms of what happens during a retreat, generally speaking, we would have 3 or 4 ceremonies over the course of the week. Each ceremony, say if we're talking about ayahuasca, each ceremony often lasts between, 4 to 9 hours, depending upon the individual, their sensitivity, how much medicine they drink, etc. And so you drink the medicine. Typically, you're sat in a circle or a semicircle, and about 30 or 40 minutes, you will begin to feel a sensation in your stomach. You will begin to have strong visualizations, and then at that point, it's quite common for people to feel if they're new to the medicine, it's common for them to feel a purgative effect. And that purgative effect is mental, emotional, and spiritual. So for me, honestly speaking, I threw up about 100 times or 100 plus times in the first ceremony, and it was very physically demanding. The 5 years before that, I had spent a lot of my time working too hard, not eating good food, drinking too much, partying in Hong Kong, any of the hours that I wasn't working. And so there was a lot of bad stuff to get out of the mind, body, heart and soul.
Was that the ayahuasca that you had that made you throw up?
Yeah, it was ayahuasca.
And that is something that people experience, right? Is initially they get really sick and then they end up having the spiritual experience.
That's right. And that's right. And largely speaking, it's because we are sick that we get sick. And so, I think if you had really good guidance, right, and you did all the physical cleansing and you did some really strong meditation and some fasting and, you did a lot of pre-work leading into ayahuasca, then I suspect that you wouldn't actually have any purgative effect. The private healers that I work with now, and their work is just on a whole nother level than what's generally available out there in the market. I have never had any sort of experience like that because number one, they help people prepare adequately, and number two, they're able to transmute those energies, as I shared before. And so as and when things become too intense for the individual, they're able to channel that in such a way that it doesn't get so overwhelming that there needs to be a physical response.
Should people, if they want to try this, maybe do a cleanse for a couple of months beforehand to kind of like clean their body of the toxins that they're holding on to, do an emotional cleanse? Is that something that's recommended?
Yeah, there's not, generally speaking, there's what's called a dieta, which is a kind of a protocol for 2 weeks prior that focuses on diet. You want to chop out all processed foods, all meat, no sex, no caffeine, no sugar, no salt, no fish, all of those sorts of things. And of course, no prescription medications. Ayahuasca does not play nice with any prescription meds. They're really, really bad. That's the big no-no. But yes, the more time, energy, and intention that people place into the preparation for one of these experiences, both in terms of what they'd like to get out of it, but also prepping mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, then the better off they'll be. Because the plant medicine world, the spirit world, if you will, responds in kind to the energetic investment that we make in kind towards the experience. So,
who normally signs up for these retreats, and what are the reasons that they typically sign up?
Yeah. So I'll contextualize this by sharing that I had envisaged there would be a larger portion of the market that would be interested in doing this from a performance and productivity perspective. So, there wasn't necessarily anything fundamentally wrong with who I was or where I was in life, or, if I had taken any sort of number of mental health examinations, I'm sure that my diagnosis would have come back as good or very good. But yet there was massive improvements to be made. And so that's fundamentally what really surprised me. And so I guess, from an overarching perspective, there's 5 motivations for people. So number one is healing, right? So trauma, addiction, PTSD, anxiety, depression. There's a lot more evidence out there for healing physical ailments as well. So one of our clients had a great breakthrough with lupus. There's a lot more evidence out there that autoimmune disorders can be cured with psychedelics. The list goes on and on. Some people have had success with cancer. I don't know if there's any hard science out there that supports that just yet, but I believe there's some ongoing. And then second would be growth, right? So how can we, creativity and growth. So how can we grow as human beings in our being, in our character? And then number 3, spirituality. So people who would like to deepen their spiritual practice, elevate their consciousness, to experience deeper and deeper levels of their innerverse. And then number 4 and number 5 are the less honorable. There's certainly a bunch of people out there who are doing this stuff recreationally. And there's a category of people who are doing this as an escape, and they're abusing these medicines.
So that leads to my question of who should not do this. I'm assuming that people that lack insight like somebody with a personality disorder that might not even have any insight into their behavior and to their mind, who would who would not be a good candidate for that, for having going on a retreat like this or using these psychedelics?
Yeah, the major contraindications are psychosis, schizophrenia, and bipolar. Actually, bipolar is kind of up for grabs a little bit. Some of the biggest breakthroughs actually come through working with people that have bipolar, but that requires a very specific container, very intensive container, and very highly skilled practitioners in order for that work to be successful, rather than the worst outcome possible. Those are the three kind of psychological contraindications. In terms of physical, people who have heart conditions or stroke are immediately out, and then we do a more in-depth screening to make sure that it's safe for them physically, more broadly than that. And then, the real small category that all retreat centers out there are really scared about are people between 20 and 30 who have, a predisposition to psychosis or schizophrenia, but haven't yet had any sign of that. And that's 1 in 5,000, 1 in 10,000. I don't know what the number is, but that's the group that's like, we can't really screen for that. And the benefits are such that, that a lot of people are willing to take that risk, but we just, at the moment, I don't know if we have a means of picking that up. So that's, in the back of people who are doing this work at a high level, that's something that's there, that is a real risk, but it's such a small percentage, right? It's sub 1% that, sub 0.1%, I think, in terms of the risk there.
So people between 20 and 30, their brain isn't even fully developed. So for women, it's 25. For men, it's 28. So for kids that young, that their brains aren't fully developed, is this something that's recommended for them? Even though I know a lot of kids that age are doing drugs. So
yeah, I think it's what I always share is that the people in my life who found these powerful substances early have not necessarily found themselves into such a positive trajectory, right? And I don't say that with any sort of judgment, but I think, as you say, we're still so sensitive, and we're still growing and developing in those young ages. I was part of a very large underground community of people who are trying to democratize and spread as much of this medicine out to people in need, ultimately. And so their intentions were whole, but lo and behold, there was a 16-year-old that was added into this group, and she shared her healing story. And, she'd had some childhood trauma, and plant medicine had helped her so much. And I just said to the guy who was leading it, I'm like, look, you've got psychologists, psychiatrists, you've got all of these people in this, you've got 200 people who you've got serious professional lives, and you're adding a 16-year-old into this mix. And I'm like, look, I can understand, that you're all peace and all love, and you want all people to help, but let's recognize the risk that's associated with this. And so I don't think there's a hard and fast answer. I think the science will prove out over time that there is a subset of people that are younger than what is generally accepted. We don't accept clients that are younger than 21, and we screen quite heavily those that would be between 21 and 27. We would screen quite extensively to really understand deeply their motivations for exploring this. But I think the reality is that there are young people who have had very traumatic early life experiences, and if this can help them, then it raises the question, right? And it's not something that we as a business want to stand for or anything of that sort. But I think the science will evolve in such a way that the right answer comes to the fore.
There's so many questions about all this, because they are young, and I'm sure there's a lot more research that needs to be done. That's pretty objective, good research. But what are your thoughts about marijuana? Would that be considered one of the plant-based medicines that you use?
So, no. So I think marijuana has great applications in treating symptoms for people with chronic conditions. personally, the best guidance, I from time to time enjoy taking edibles from a recreational perspective. It's, psychedelics, I don't really do from a recreational perspective because I find them so powerful. But edibles from a recreational perspective, it could be fun. But actually, the teachers that I'm learning from, they say no, they don't. They really don't do good things for us overall in terms of improving our neurology or improving our state of being. So they've discouraged me from taking it, and I listen to them in terms of what's in the best interest to continue my development and my elevation. So we, for all of our clients, we recommend that they basically stop all alcohol and stop all marijuana for the duration of the 7 weeks that we work with them.
Yeah, it really scares me how many young kids are now, especially now that it's becoming legal across the country, how many young kids are using and the amount of marijuana that they're using in their developing brain. A lot of them, like they start at 12, 13, and by the time they hit college, they hit a wall and they can't even function at a normal rate. And then what's the damage that it's going to cause after their brain fully develops? So that's still something that's unknown, but so many are using it thinking it's harmless.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I was floored last time I was in the US. Like, it's literally like $1 for one of these edibles, right? And it's like, and I think it was like delivered like 120 edibles for $140 to my friend's front door. It's like, wow, that's enough for the next 3 years, 5 years.
Probably gonna be consumed in a week.
Yeah, and then not only that, but the dosage, right? I mean, the dosage of these edibles, like I was chopping one of these gummy bears into 4, and 1/4 of one of these gummy bears is sending me on like a proper, almost psychedelic journey. And now there's these ones that are like 100, I want to say 100 milligrams that you can get in one thing. And so like, I'm usually on between like 7, I'm in the kind of the 7 to 10 range, and that sends me pretty far. I've got down the psychedelic path and even high dose psychedelic path, but like I'm finding that like 7 to 10, I can't even imagine what happens when you load up on something like 10 times what sends me on a journey.
Well, I guess these people are consuming so much that they need a lot just to get the same effect, right? So that's going. And then what I found out was the marijuana, the THC content of the plant was way less in the 70s and 80s than it is now. I don't know how they've increased it, but somehow they're way more potent now than they were in the 70s.
Yeah, it's that old, what was his name? Mendel. Remember that biological experiment? It's all the crossbreeding that they've done is what I've been told over the past 40 or 50 years that have just maximized the THC content. So yeah, it's just like my friend was saying, it's like 10 times stronger than it was in the 70s when smoked. It's like, it's really on a whole different level.
It's crazy. So for people that are interested in doing something like Beyond Retreats, what's the cost that's associated with that and the time frame and the commitment that's required?
Yeah, it's just minor correction. Behold Retreats. You're not the first person to make that. You're not the first person to make that mistake. I'm sure Beyond Retreats is there. I know they're a company. They're probably getting some extra traffic. But yeah, so for us, what we do is 3 weeks of guided preparation. So what we're trying to do is to establish the right container for people to really get the most out of this work. And that's mental work, that's emotional work, and then the spiritual and energetic work combined with the plant medicine all coming together. And so we teach the tools for metacognition. We teach the tools for emotional and trauma release, right? So you can release those lower level emotions out of the physical body. And then we also do energetic work for our clients in preparation for them to go on the plant medicine retreat. So through our online program, some one-to-one coaching, some group coaching, then we prep our clients, then we send them on a plant medicine retreat. And when they're well prepped, then they have, you're well guided to have breakthrough after breakthrough. And then we guide them through the integration process in the 3 weeks that follow. So for us, we're not the cheapest game in town, but we sign up to our quality of work, and our program started about $11K US, and they go up from there. Personally speaking, I've made all my major progress doing private work. And so we have a global network of private healers who are doing this work at the very highest level. And so, generally speaking, people start with kind of group ceremonies to understand what this work is all about. And there's a sort of kind of felt safety in numbers. And then once they understand, oh, wow, there's just really deep and meaningful potential to quality of everyday life, then they often find themselves more into the private path and doing this work with private healers into a 2-to-1 or a 1-to-1 sort of a setting.
So you said 7 weeks, the entire 7 weeks is spent like in Costa Rica or Peru, or is there some work done ahead of time on your own and then you go over there?
Yeah, exactly. So the 3 weeks before and the 3 weeks after are done from home, because most of our clients are, in the business world, and they'd love to be able to take 7 weeks, but not practical for them. So it's the 1 week where we go on retreat that is required, that they disconnect and be fully physically present on retreat.
So interesting. It sounds really fascinating. So how did you end up in Thailand?
So I actually, after my plant medicine experience about 5 years ago now, I returned to the corporate world. I had an opportunity to establish the Bangkok office for a global consulting firm, smaller consulting firm. And so I jumped at that opportunity. I was actually really interested and motivated to further develop my patience. And I thought Thailand might represent an opportunity to do that after 5 years in the manic frenzy that is Hong Kong. So I spent about 2.5 years in Bangkok, establishing and growing the consulting firm there to about 100 people. But while I was doing that, I was really preparing for a shift into this line of work to be able to guide people towards really transformational experiences as opposed to psychedelic experiences.
So knowing what you know now about everything that you've gone through, doing the retreats and seeing the people going through these experiences, what would you have told your younger self with your hippie parents about this kind of work, about having these psychedelic trips and having healing through those experiences? What advice do you have? Or what advice would you have for your younger self?
Be more open-minded. Be more open-minded. I think that we're at such an interesting stage in our collective evolution that it's clear that so many of us just have a fundamentally different experience of reality. And so I think it's important that each of us keeps an open mind and recognizes that others' experience of this world may not reflect our own. And that's okay. And that we can still engage and know and love and trust these people, even if their experience of the world is different from our own.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Where can people find you and connect with you if they want to learn more about your retreats or even psychedelic experiences?
Yeah, we're online at www.behold-retreats.com, or you can find us on Instagram at behold_retreats.
Oh, that sounds awesome. I want to thank you so much for making the time. And I know the time difference is huge between where you are and where I'm at, but thank you for making the time and joining me and having this discussion with me today.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure. And you've asked such great questions, so I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Wow, such an interesting discussion about psychedelics. If you're interested in trying psychedelics, please be sure to work with a trained individual to avoid the risks and side effects, but also to get the most benefit. To learn more about Jonathan and Behold Retreats, please visit transforminganxiety.com/21. When you're there, go ahead and leave me a comment and let me know your thoughts about this episode. If you haven't already, you can show support for the Mental Health Break podcast by subscribing wherever you're tuning in from today. We have some great interviews lined up, and you don't want to miss a single episode. Subscribe today so you get notified when new episodes drop. I can't wait to see you here next week, same time, same place. Bye for now.